If you figured out how to make adjustments on your phone, then making adjustments in Photoshop really isn't a huge stretch. Once you have an image open, down in the bottom right in your layers panel, you've got this black and white circle, and that has all of the adjustment layers. So you can play around with color balances, black and white, brightness levels, and so on. Many adjustments you're probably familiar with. When you make a selection, you don't actually see any change because you have this properties panel in which you can change the settings that you have. The power of this is that you can go back and you can change those things. So if I add another one, for example, I do a color balance and I play around with the color balance, I can make that change. Now if I want to go back and change the brightness contrast, all I have to do is click on the icon and I can go back, and so I can play around with the effects that I want, and I can turn off the eyeballs to see whether or not I even want to see those effects, right? So you notice how when I made that, it made a white box here, and that is the mask part. And if it's all white, that means the effect is happening to the entire image. So the power in Photoshop is that you can select part of the image and then only make that a selection for part of that image. So for that, you have to learn how to use the selection tools, and they're all up in here. And there are, if you hold it down, the rectangles and ellipses, and they all work sort of the same way. So if I do an ellipse and I draw it, it makes me one, and you notice how I have 4 buttons up at the top. First one means every time I draw, it makes a new selection. The second one adds to the selection. The third one takes away from the selection. And the last one makes a new selection from the part that's overlapping, right? So those tools work the same way no matter which of the selection tools I'm in. So here, rectangles, ellipses. Next one down, you've got lasso tools. That means freehand lasso tool is one. The polygon lasso tool, every time you click, it makes an anchor and goes around, and I'm on the minus right now, so this is going to take it away when I hit enter. And there's also a magnetic lasso tool, and I'm going to make sure I make a new selection. And what that does is it detects edges. So if I draw just roughly along his body and the shirt, it snaps to the edge here and goes around, and I can do this relatively quickly, and it will jump to the edges and make that my selection for me. So it's a very quick way to make a selection. Go around, and you're going to hit enter, and it's made that selection. And you can see a couple of places it wasn't perfect, but it did a pretty fast job on that. So that's a magnetic lasso tool. Then there is 2 more, or 3 more. The object selection tool is amazing. It's a new tool, but it doesn't work that well on the school computers because it has to upload and download images. So it sort of makes your computer freeze for a bit, but it does work great if you play it at home or if it's not a busy time. The magic wand tool picks up everything that's the same color. So if I click on the blue here, it will pick up all of the blue all the way down to the jeans. It depends on what this tolerance is set at here. So if I set my tolerance to a lower number, let's say 25, and I click on that blue here, then it's only picked up some of the blue. So you can check on that in the case of the shirt and so on. So you can click with that. And again, you can add with that too. So then if I click in a few more places, I can add to that selection. But the most powerful one, and the one I think is the one to start with, is the quick selection tool. So what that does is if I it works a little bit different. It has brushes here, but it makes a new one, add and subtract from it. So if I draw in here, I can draw around and I can get the sky selected really quickly. In this case, it added the head, so I'm going to go minus. I'm going to take away the head, and I get that selection, right? And now I can go in, and now if I make my adjustment layer and I play with brightness contrast, for example, I can then change the brightness contrast of the sky, right? And you notice how I have a mask that's black for the part that's not changed and white for the part that is changing. So what I'm going to do now, another adjustment, I'm going to go back to my quick selection tool, and this time I'm going to just select the shirt. And again, you notice how quickly it grabbed that for me, and I'm going to make sure it's on plus, not minus. So I'm adding the edge here at the bottom, and I want to take away the arm because I don't want to change the color of that. So now I've got the shirt selected. Oh, also not this neck here. So I've got the shirt selected, and now I can go in here and I can play with my hue saturation, for example, and I can actually change the shirt color quite quickly. So, and again, I have a mask, and I can go back and make those changes. The other cool part with this is that because you have a mask that is black and white, you can actually change the adjustments of that mask. So that I go to that mask and I take a paintbrush, I can then make sure I have a soft paintbrush, and I can make sure that the paintbrush is relatively large. So if I click down here, I can make sure it's a large paintbrush. And then if my color on my paintbrush, and I don't have my color palette open, I'm just going to go to my colors here. If the color of my paintbrush is white, then I can take stuff away from this or add things to this mask. And if I paint in black, it will take away things from the mask. So if I go black and I go to this mask here, I can then say, okay, I'm going to keep this part of the mask separate here. So I'm going to not make that adjustment to this part of the sky. Right? Not the greatest effect, but you can see how you can make changes to part of it. So for example, if I just wanted to change the shirt, and if it's black, and I can say, okay, I'm going to make sort of a splatter design on the shirt with the original color, right? And you can notice how that is black on that white mask now. And I can go the other way to white, and I can get rid of that again. So you can add and subtract to the masks quite nicely, and you have all of these changes, and you can save them. You can turn the eyeballs on and off, and choose whether you want the adjustments there or not. And that's really the power of playing with Photoshop, by having these different versions and adjustments without ever losing your original image, which is still exactly the way when you open it.